Welcome back to Sabbath School Boot Camp, my friends. We are in, I don't know, it feels like week 75. It's actually only lesson 5. We're talking about the Tower of Babel this week. This is a show for Sabbath School teachers and front row type students who are eager to get the most out of their Sabbath School class. So that's what Sabbath School Boot Camp is for. We're going to hit this lesson. We're going to kick up some dust and see what we can find here as we get digging. I am joined, as always, by my friend Jim Merrills, who is going to no doubt direct us towards Revelation several times in the course of this video, and we are thankful for that, aren't we? Jim is as an elder. He has his MDiv from the Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary in Berrien Springs, where I think we were there at the same time, right?
Yeah, right.
All right. We are talking about the Tower of Babel today. Well, that's what the lesson really promises we get to. That's what the image is in the lesson. You can go to absg.adventist.org if you want to get your own lesson. But really, we're actually starting in Genesis chapter 9. And if you go over to Sunday's lesson, it says, the curse of Ham. Now, Jim, this is a lesson talking about why we shouldn't eat bacon. Is that right?
We kind of covered that when he came out of the ark.
Oh, okay. Then what is the curse of Ham all about? What's going on?
You know, it's very interesting that you bring this up right at the start because, as you know, I had the opportunity to visit the Creation Museum and the Ark Experience. And our Christian colleague down there, Ken Ham, I'm not going to get into the details. I won't get into details now.
I'm saying, are you saying Ken Ham is cursed? Is that what this is about? Boom.
He did mention the fact that it's unfortunate that his last name happens to go along with this story. He did say that.
Yeah.
But I will throw out for our viewers that they might want to do a little YouTubing, because he actually takes the position, as I understood it, he actually takes the position that this is not Ham who is being cursed, that if we approach the text correctly, that we would understand that it's the grandson who is the one who is cursed, and for perhaps his activity. So very, very interesting. You know, a lot of times, as you know, we come with our biases. Now, I don't recall your background, but like my background was Seventh-day Adventist all the way back to my childhood.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until I left the very Adventist community where we lived, which was Hinsdale and the Adventist Sanitarium there, left there, went into the military, and suddenly I realize, as I'm listening to so many of these soldiers and their understanding of Scripture, and then working as a chaplain's assistant and all the different views there, I mean, it wasn't until I got outside the box of Adventism that I really began to appreciate how simplistic my questions and answers about the Bible had been. And so, listening recently to Ken Ham, I don't know if I necessarily agree with everything he says, but it is somewhat refreshing to be listening to, quote, the other side and hearing their explanations.
Sure. And I think what you're saying is actually reflected here. I know it says the curse of Ham, and I'm sure if our viewers will pull open their Bible, they might be curious to see how their Bibles headline this. It's good to keep in mind the headlines in the Bible over different sections are not necessarily inspired. They're just what people put there to kind of summarize what's about to happen. If we go over to the NET here, you'll notice it says the curse on Canaan, which is 100% a far more accurate way of putting this. Now, Dukan, of course, is concerned about the racial implications of this curse on Ham. He, and how this text has been used in the past It was used by segregationists during the antebellum America and during the Civil War to say, well, if you look real carefully here, that Canaan is cursed. Well, they would say Ham is cursed, right? Because Ham, as you can see here, Ham is the father of Canaan, right? And so the descendants here of Ham, what is it? You got to scroll up here. Oh no, it's the next chapter, right? All right. I'm going to figure out how to get there through all these notes. There we go, Genesis 10. Okay. It says, the sons of Ham were Cush, Mitzrayim, Put, and Canaan. Now, if you have a handy little footnote thing in your Bible, you can look down, but here I can just click on it. You can see, well, where is Cush? See, it says the descendants of Cush settled in Ethiopia. It's in Africa. Mitzrayim, of course, is Egypt. That's actually the Hebrew word for Egypt, Mitzrayim. And Put is in Libya. So you have Ethiopia, you have Egypt, you have Libya, 3 of the 4 sons of Ham. And of course, those are all African countries. So certain Christian Americans in the South in yesteryear would look at this and say, see, Ham was cursed. The Africans are cursed. They're not under God's blessing. We can do whatever we want to them. But of course, Jim, the insane thing about this is the only one of Ham's children that were cursed was Canaan. not the kids who eventually went and founded nations in Africa. It was Canaan. The one who stayed in the Middle East is the one who was cursed. And of course, the Israelites would later go and conquer Canaan. So it was a war of cousins, the conquest was. But, I mean, that's just what's insane about this, is to say this is the curse of Ham is to entirely miss the mark. It really is the curse of Canaan, and that's how I think it should be seen.
I would just add to that, because you've mentioned Dukan, who is the primary author contributor to the lesson. Dukan has also pointed out that not only have we revealed some ignorance in this area, but the same thing with the Jewish people. And, that one's on my mind this weekend going into Easter, because while we say wonderful things about God's gift through Jesus Christ with his shed blood and his resurrection, there is also that little bit of a dark side where those who have not really read the scriptures very closely also carry a certain bias or racist attitude towards Jews. And so the news has this little black cloud that comes along with it. So this is just another reason for us to be studying our scriptures very well.
Yes, and I'll hasten to add, folks, that you guys are going to be watching this and preparing for this lesson after Easter. We're recording it before Easter. Let me get rid of this, the Bible thing here, just to kind of, in case you're like, I can't believe anyone would understand the text this way. All right, this is the 4th president of the Southern Baptist Convention, who writes in the years around the Civil War, from Ham were descended the nations that occupied the land of Canaan, and those that now constitute the African or Negro race. Their inheritance, according to prophecy, has been and will continue to be slavery, and as long as we have the Bible, we expect to maintain it. Now, I will say, of course, that the Southern Baptist Convention has renounced this way of thinking, but there's a reason why they're called the Southern Baptist Convention. It's because they seceded from other Baptist groups to protect slavery. So this doesn't reflect, if you know a Southern Baptist today, this probably does not reflect their attitude. But it's there. It's on the historical record. Anyways, okay, back to the Bible.
Now, staying on that point for a moment.
Okay.
I would also add that Ken Ham, and I personally sat in on this lecture from him, but you were just reading there about the race. And one of the things that Ken Ham strongly promotes in his teachings, if you will, is that there are not all these races, that we are all one race under Adam and Eve. And so there's a lot to be learned out here. I would also throw this out. You and I talked about this a few moments ago. You're hitting the genealogy before we start talking about the Tower of Babel. And I would just like to point out for our listeners While this genealogy might seem old, there are portions of the genealogy that are absolutely imperative to understanding some of the theology today. And I would just throw out a couple of things like Magog, Tubal, in a day in which we are literally watching a nation like Russia and what it is doing. This understanding amongst evangelical Christians in terms of prophecy goes all the way back to Genesis chapter 10. So we should not think of this as this is just Old Testament, old stuff. This is, in fact, the very foundation upon which modern prophecy is currently viewed in terms of some of the futuristic, dispensational, literal aspects of prophecy by evangelical Christians.
Yep, yep. There's a lot hiding here in these genealogies that, you see even this little part about Nimrod here in verse 8. He was a mighty hunter before the Lord, okay. And the primary regions of his kingdom were what? Babel. Of course, Babylon's going to feature prominently later on in the Bible. And now we kind of know where it came from. We also, as I mentioned with Canaan, it's kind of like, well, why is it right for Israel to invade Canaan and take over the land? Da-da-da-da-da. Oh, you read Genesis 9 and 10, and you realize, well, God had put a curse on Canaan and sort of kind of separated him from the family of nations, so to speak. And so later on, Israel will roll up in, and you realize, okay, that's kind of the justification that's being laid here in Genesis 9 and 10. I get it. It's a lot of names. And no one expects you to memorize them all. But you'll find gems in here that help explain things that will pop up later on. There's seeds being planted here, aren't there? So yes, if you're reading things like Gog and Magog in Revelation, you're like, this makes absolutely no sense whatsoever. Read back. You have here Ophir. Later on, of course, the Bible will talk about the gold of Ophir being, that Solomon was going to acquire and things like that. Anyways, there's a lot of cool stuff in here. All right. I will say, before we move on, I will say that there's some... Dukan notes a lot of similarities between what we see in this story of Ham. And by the way, just if you need a memory refresher, what happened was that Noah planted a vineyard, and he got drunk, and he when he passed out, I guess, his robe flew up and exposed himself, and his son Ham saw his father's nakedness. His other sons were a little more dutiful, and they kind of backed into the room and covered him up, and so that's why Ham gets in trouble. But it's not Ham who gets in trouble; it's his son Canaan, for some reason, that feels the brunt of it. And anyways, the point that Dukan brings up with this weird story, and he calls it strange, so I'm not out of line by calling it weird, is that you have the eating of fruit that leads to some negative consequences. You have nakedness, you have covering, you have a curse, you have a blessing. There's also a failure to honor your creator / your parents here. And I think this story highlights how we don't just have one fall, we have a fall in every generation. This is kind of the story of in a sense, it's a story of Noah's fall, literally, and it's a story of Ham's fall. And so the fall isn't just something that happened a long time ago. It's something that we're all wrestling with. Maybe it's not fruit all the time, but it's something else that we kind of fail to live up to what God wants of us.
I think something to throw in there, those things that you just mentioned, those elements with regard to Noah. I mean, we're going back to creation. We're seeing a redoing of Adam's fall, and I think that's important because even as we continue going forward, well, let me go backwards first of all. We had the ark, which the whole flood was an undoing of creation and creation. And now as we go forward to discuss the Tower of Babel, we're going to find again that there's many particulars in the story of the Tower of Babel that also go back to the undoing of creation, new creation, usurping God. So it seems that the author of Genesis is sticking with the creation theme over and over and over again through all these initial stories.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Yeah, we're seeing what happened in Genesis 1 to 3 just playing out over and over and over again in different ways. Absolutely.
Yes.
All right, we're going to go over to Monday. This is talking about Genesis chapter 10, which we just looked at a bit, so I don't have a lot to add here. Dukan gives a few reasons why Genesis 10 matters, what its purpose is, why we are given Genesis 10. And I think he says that it emphasizes the historical nature of biblical events. It demonstrates continuity from past to present, and it reminds us of the fragility of being sinful human beings. I think it also helps because, if you're living in ancient times, everybody's family, right? And knowing the story of where these different nations came from, for them just kind of helps understand how to relate to them. In everything is family in the sense of, like, you see how the disciples reacted to the Samaritans, right? Why the Samaritans? Because they were kind of like, they were the remnant of Israel that got destroyed, and they were a mixture of other peoples that moved in, and so they weren't, sometimes you react the strongest to people who are closest to you, but a little bit different from you. You can be, you know what this is like whenever you're like going to church and you guys just argue to death on the way to church in the car, and then as soon as you step out, there's strangers there, and you're like, "Oh, how you doing? Happy Sabbath, so good to see you." Because family, those who are closest to you, can get on your nerves the most, and so you see this kind of hatred between the Jews and the Samaritans because they were so similar and sort of and related. You see that. So, anyways, just understanding these relationships between different people groups can really help understand their relations later on in the Bible, and why they react to the way they do to each other. Yeah. So it's helpful to know where all these countries came from, all these nations came from. All right, that's all I've got to say about Monday. Jim, did you have anything you wanted to add to this?
He brought out the, let me pull my notes up here. He brought out the 70 nations, and I thought it was interesting. And one of the items I was reading here, that the 70 nations, there's also the 70 members of Jacob's family. There's the 70 elders in Israel. There is the 70 disciples that Jesus sent out. And the one thing I quoted there from the Sabbath School lesson in my notes was, quote, "It suggests the mission of Israel toward the nations." Just yesterday, I put up a interesting little coin illustration up on the Revelation Facebook group, just kind of as a reminder of the fact that when we talk about, sending out the gospel, proclaiming the gospel, this was actually God's design way back from the very beginning, was that the gospel would go out to the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, okay. Well, I imagine in your classes you're probably not going to spend too long on Monday on Genesis chapter 10, but there might be a few things you want to pull out there, like we did. If you're like me, you're itching to get to the Tower of Babel here on Tuesday. Like, this is the good stuff here. Okay. The Tower of Babel. It's one of those stories in the Bible where the significance of the story is greater than the story itself. Because on the face of it, these people get together, they build a tower, God frustrates their ability to communicate with each other, the end. I mean, nothing really ends up happening. Nobody dies, no fire comes down from heaven. It's really not a story where anything, this is not the flood spanned 3 chapters. This is a story that gets told in just a few verses. But the significance of it, like what it means, is so much more fruitful than what actually happened. So it says, and we can I think we can head over to the Bible here for this. I'm going to get myself, scroll down super fast. I'm sorry if you get motion sickness. We're going to get on to Genesis 11 here. Okay. Again, we're in the NET. It says the whole earth had a common language and a common vocabulary. That's not surprising. That is to be expected. And it says when the people moved eastward. Why is east a significant direction, because this is the way that they were kicked out of the garden. And they find themselves here on this plain of Shinar. So what does this tell us? Okay, it's in Babylonia. It's in that region where Babylon would later pop up. So basically, if they had kept traveling east, and I don't think we need to be super strict about this, like if we can find this plain, then the Garden of Eden was exactly due west. Okay, it was west-ish, which is why that there's some thought that the Garden of Eden was in Israel, what later became Israel, or around that area, right? Because they're moving east of Eden and they arrive in Babylonia. Well, that makes sense. So the people arrive there, and of course, if you're reading this as an Israelite later on, you understand the significance of something happening in Babylon, because Babylon, boo, Babylon. They arrived. They found a plain in Shinar, flat area. They settled there, and they said, "Let's make bricks and bake them thoroughly. You know, we want to build something of quality here." And they said, "Let's build a city and a tower with its top in the heavens, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Otherwise, we will be scattered across the face of the entire earth." Okay, why? I think this is kind of hard sometimes for people to understand. They want to build a city and a tower. That's not a bad thing. I mean, you want to build stuff, fine, so that we may make a name for ourselves. Jim, what do you take from this? Like, what are they really trying to do here?
On the one hand, it sounds like we're back there at the tree in the garden with Eve, and we can be like God. On the other hand, this is like a hinge story in my mind, because it's also kind of laying it's a little precursor to what we're going to experience later with King Nebuchadnezzar and his attitude towards being the top of the world, and his dwelling place, which happens to be in the same place, Shinar, Babylon. So I see this as kind of a hinge story, going back to the beginning, but also going to the future.
Yeah. But what do you think this idea of let's make a name for ourselves? Like what?
Well, yeah, it's very interesting, and of course, I know you want me to bring up the Book of Revelation.
Of course, I do.
but names are important all the way through to the end. I mean, we have those whose names are in the Book of the Lamb.
Yeah.
And then we also have in the seven churches where Christ is telling us that he's going to give us a new name. So, I mean, names are important from the very beginning. In fact, we just got done talking about how as Adam is leaving the garden and the ground is cursed, yet he turns to his wife and he sees hope in her and says, "You know what? I'm gonna name you Eve, because you are going to be the source of life going forward." So names are important from the beginning to the very end. Even Jesus, when he renames the disciple there with Peter, I mean, names are important.
Yes, they are, and there might be a little bit of a hint here. Maybe, my daughter goes to a Hebrew school, and out of reverence for God, they don't say, we have Lord, like kind of in all lower caps in our Bibles, and some of our Bibles, instead of saying Yahweh. Well, this is not of course they won't use the proper name for God, so when they get to this point, they'll say Adonai, or they'll say Hashem, which literally just means the name. And so some people have read into this story and said they want to make a name for themselves, like they want to make a god for themselves. They want to make their own Hashem. That might be reading a little bit too much into it, but I think the basic idea of what these people are motivated by is the same. They kind of want to establish not just a city for themselves, but a civilization for ourselves. And it's to prevent themselves from being scattered across the face of the whole earth. They're afraid of perhaps a flood. They want to be God-proof. Like we don't want God. We've seen what God has done. He's kicked us out of the Garden of Eden to move east. He sent a flood to kill a bunch of people. We've survived that. We're still moving east. We're done running. We are going to plant ourselves here, and we are going to build this great big tower, and we are going to be flood proof. Now, of course, again, if you're living in ancient Israel, you're going to notice, if you are familiar with Babylon, I'm just going to drop this in here. Somebody made a nice little recreation of Babylon. Of course, forget the Nebuchadnezzar part because this is long before him, straddling the Euphrates River there. And I'll just drop one more on top of it. You can see here, this is kind of how it was laid out. And what do you have there in the middle? You have a tower. This was the temple. So there was you didn't just build huge works of art or huge architectural works back then for no reason. There was always a religious meaning to it, from the pyramids of Egypt to the ziggurat in Babylon. And that's what we mean by tower here. It's probably a tower that is like this one that you see on the screen. It's not a tower like the Leaning Tower of Pisa or a skyscraper. It's probably a ziggurat, which is kind of like a stepped pyramid of sorts. Go ahead.
I do have it on good record that it was more like the Leaning Tower of Pisa as the languages got confounded, confused, and they realized we better stop.
Very well. It probably leaned later on, definitely. So anyways, like, this is what they're trying to do, is they're trying to build this great big tower, which has religious significance. They're trying to build, Babylon, of course, means gate to the gods. It's a way, and so the idea was this tower was going to be a gate to the gods. If we build it up tall enough, we'll be able to get back in heaven, perhaps. We'll have access to what we lost in this communion with the gods. And so they want to build a city, make a name for ourselves. We're going to be the people who accomplish this. We're done running. We're planting ourselves here. We are building up to get back to heaven. This is, in some ways, this is really the antithesis of everything that God is about. Everything that they do is backwards. It says in verse 5 that the Lord came down to see the city and the tower that the people had started building. And I think... I can understand why they wanted to be God-proof. It's a natural response to the flood, right? But when God comes down, I know one commentator thought of this as a sign of mockery. Like, why does God got to come down? Can he not see the tower from heaven? Of course he does. But they think that they're building such this great big tall tower. And so one person said, the idea of God coming down is mockery, because he's like, oh, you guys think you built this tall tower that will reach to heaven. I have to come down to see it. I can't even see it from up there. It's so small to me. They see this as kind of like a God just making a point about all their human achievement here, that it's not as great as they think that it is.
The emphasis that I found in this was on the unity, if you will. There is the let us make. There is the let us build. There is the we are one. In fact, I was really struck by what Dukan had written in his commentary. He refers to this as an abusive unity. In other words, here is the Lord saying, I want you to expand out. I want you to spread out. Obviously, God did not see something real positive here in everyone living together in one centralized location. And Dukan, in his commentary, went on to say, in terms of the tower being built and all, he says the human person had become less important than the tower and less valuable than the bricks that were used to build it. So when you think of his words there, abusive unity, and I'm getting a picture here, which I don't see how you can get around this. This is beginning to look like the heart of Revelation at the time of the end. There is the desire we all come together and we become one, and we become like God. And then, of course, we recognize the abuse of that unity that comes out in particularly Revelation 13. Yeah,
absolutely. And I think that's a good way of putting it. When you see Babylon in Revelation, I think oftentimes it takes similarities. It's more connected to this Tower of Babel than it is to historical Babylon. Obviously, there's connections there with the beasts and all these other things. But But don't overlook the Tower of Babel and its significance throughout the Bible in terms of, especially Revelation, in terms of how it really just summarizes the sinful human project. I want to be God-proof. I am going to make a name for myself. I am going to plant myself wherever I want to be. And through this tower, I'm going to have access to the good life that God has denied me, right? And even if they don't use the word God, like that's what the project is all about. You know, there are even atheistic projects today that basically have the same attitude and the same goals. The language about those goals and that project has changed. No longer it's about we want to get back to heaven, but it's still what heaven represents to them, which is the good life, which is freedom, which is autonomy, which is peace, which is meaning, right? That's heaven for them. They don't have to use the word heaven. They don't have to use the word God, but it's still the same project. And so when you get to Revelation 17 and 18, of course, you're seeing, you know, actually starting with 14, when Babylon has fallen, like this project that you guys have been building since the very beginning has failed. You cannot live without God. There's no anything good without God. He's everywhere in the universe, and there's no place where he is not. So you cannot live a life without God because he himself has given you life. Now, one more thing. We're seeing here in these first few chapters, God is unraveling the blessings that he has given people. He gave them life, then he denies them access to the tree of life to prevent them from living. God guarantees that they're going to die because of it, because he denies them access to the tree of life. And then what is he doing here? He gave them unity of speech, unity of vocabulary, the ability to communicate with each other effortlessly. He denies them that too. He's taking back his blessings. He's taking back his blessings that he has given humanity when he realizes that those blessings are being weaponized against each other and against him. And so what we see in the world, if we have death, I mean, God has responsibility for that. If we see a difficulty communicating with each other, God has a responsibility for that. He has taken those blessings away from people. And he would argue for our own good, because we can get up to all sorts of mischief with his blessings. We rely upon his blessings.
And I think your words for our own good really hits the point here. I've been thinking of merciful. We may not see it initially as his mercy, but when the Lord steps in and, for example, says, you will no longer have access to this tree, well, can you imagine if we lived eternally as sinners?
Yeah.
Okay. Here he takes away the ability to communicate, and out of his mercy, you people are going to destroy yourselves before you even start. And so by changing the languages and getting them to scatter, once again, he's stepping in and he's doing something that actually is for their benefit, even though they don't recognize it.
Yes. God introduced division and destruction in order to prevent unity around sin. Now, I want to be very careful here, because you have some Adventists who, every time they hear somebody talk about, we just need to come together, we just need to have unity, as if, oh, see, that's a bad thing. Unity is a bad thing. Unity is not a bad thing. We should strive for unity. You know, Paul says, live peaceably with all men. And I would say he doesn't include women, but I'd include women, yeah. But, you know, like we should try to have peace with one another. We should try to build bridges of understanding with one another. We should find ways to work together. But I think the concern about is this, you called it abusive unity here, right? This kind of unity let's come together for an ignoble purpose. Mm-hmm. That's what we're worried about here. So, I mean, there's a good unity and a bad unity. We should pursue the good unity with each other. And we shouldn't throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, oh, you know, look at this, they want to come together, we shouldn't come together. It's like, no, we should build bridges with other churches, with people of other religions, with people with no religion. We should build bridges of understanding with them and work together in ways, I don't know, like helping Ukraine, feeding the hungry. You know, if somebody else is engaged in that work and it makes sense for us to work alongside them, then let's do it. I mean, they shouldn't be afraid of that. It's this unity against God. That is the wrong kind of unity.
Well, as I've often pointed out with some of our youth groups, there's more than one gospel. There's more than one voice out there that has good news. And You might find yourself unifying yourself with a gospel that actually perverts the true gospel or prevents the true gospel.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. Now, when we're talking about this God coming down bit, let's see here. I'm going to try to I have another quote I want to throw up here for you guys. I got to find the right font. All right, let's try this. And of course, it's going to go. Oh, let's see. Oh, good. So this is from Sumerian epic, Enmerkar and the Lord of Arata. That's what it's called. And it says this: on that day when there is no snake, when there is thus neither fear nor trembling, man has no rival. At that time may the lands of Kubur and Hamazi and Sumer and Akkad and the Martu land, may they all address Enlil together in a single language. This is a brief little excerpt. I know there's no context to what's going on here. But the point is that in this Sumerian story, there's a dream of a day when the people of these various lands will all address Enlil, this deity, in a single language. So there's this aspiration. There's this aspiration that the people from these different lands, this is after, of course, the Tower of Babel, that we'll learn to break these language barriers, and we can all worship this God Enlil together in a single language. So you see, even in this story, this Sumerian story, there's still this Tower of Babel desire that we wish we could all worship this false god together in a single language. This is the goal. This is the Babylonian project, which is not limited to Babylon, I might add. But this also means, dare I say it, this also means that what we see in Acts chapter 2 with Pentecost is the good version of the Tower of Babel. When people from different nations come together, the language barrier is broken by this gift of tongues, and people are all able to worship God together, the true God. The true God. God is not against bringing different people together to speak in one language and worship in one language. God is not against that, but it should be done for the true God, not for false gods. That's what we see at Pentecost with the disciples and all the believers who are gathered around at that time. In fact, you see common words there in that Pentecost story. You're welcome to go look at it in Acts 2. That it says that the tongues of fire there are divided, just the same word that's used here in Genesis 11. And it says that the people were initially confused, which again, same word that's used here in Genesis chapter 11. I think when Luke was writing Acts, he's aware of this parallel back to the Tower of Babel, that God was in a way kind of spiritually undoing what was done at the Tower of Babel. He was undoing it for his people. He was creating one new kind of super nation, which is the church. All right.
And I'm going to go all the way down to the book of Revelation.
Okay.
I mean, the stories here are similar. What happens at the end of Revelation? The serpent is destroyed. All the nations come together. There is the leaves for healing of all the nations. And now we can all speak with one voice and praising God for eternity.
Yes. That's God's dream. I think sometimes, man, you hear Christians talk like, we shouldn't work together with other believers, da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. It's like, well, you're going to have to someday. So, if they're going to be saved, you're going to have to work with them someday. The key is just, what does that cooperation look like? What are we unifying around? That's the important question. It's the only one that really matters. Otherwise, we should look for unity with other people, because we're going to get it. We're going to get it one day. This is what God's trying to do at Pentecost, and as you point out, Jim, this is what he's doing in Revelation as well. That's the ultimate goal, is that there will be unity among, and of course, as Adventists, we believe people other than Adventists are going to be saved in the end. So there's going to be unity among Christians there who are being saved. And so why not start now? Okay. I think we have Thursday, which remains. I don't know if you have anything else you want to add to Wednesday here.
Well, we haven't mentioned chiasm, so we got to throw chiasm in here.
So it's like a checklist every week, like Revelation, check, chiasm. Oh, we haven't done that one yet. Please.
No. But again, the chiasm, I don't know if you have a picture of it, but anyways, the chiasm here in this chapter leads to that central point in verse 15 that the Lord came down. There's the emphasis. The Lord
Okay.
came down. And
I don't know if you can read it.
one of the things that I really appreciate about that is that the Lord is always coming down. He comes
Yes.
down to our parents in the garden. He comes down here and acts in mercy of the people to change their language, confuse them, and scatter them for their own good. He comes
Yes.
down to Moses and says, I want to dwell with my people, build me a sanctuary. He comes down.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. What happened to my man?
Among the seven churches in the vision to John. And finally, at the end of Revelation, he comes down with the great city and plants itself here on the earth for his people. He is always coming down on behalf of his creation.
Yes, he is. There we go. There, I snagged the picture real quick, just in time for you to finish.
Perfect.
But yeah, you're right. He's always coming down. And the human desire, the sinful human desire, is that we're all going to go up there. By my works, by my efforts, by my ambition, by my strength, by my piety, I'm going to get myself up there. And so this is the weird thing. It's like we don't have to work so hard to get up there. All we have to do is wait for him to come down to us. So why do we spend so much time trying to work our way to heaven? This is why it makes no sense. Man, we're going to get into salvation by faith alone here in Genesis chapter 11. Come on. All because of this, the Lord came down thing. Man alive. Like this, it just does not work to work your way to heaven. You can't build a tower tall enough. You're not strong enough to lift enough bricks. You're not smart enough. You're not spiritual enough. You're just too broken to get yourself up there because of sin. You just have to wait and he'll come down. He'll come down. Amen. And then he'll bring us home with him. All right? We need a ride is what we do. We need a ride. Jesus is our ride. He'll bring us down. Okay. Well said. We're getting on a Thursday now, and what is shaping up to be our shortest video yet. Congratulations. All right. I mean, there's actually a lot you can say about the Tower of Babel. I mean, you can develop any one of these themes and encourage you to do so. But for our purposes, we realize like we're making hour-and-a-half long videos, and people only have typically about 45 minutes to teach the class. So what are you going to do? Okay, so this is talking about redemption and exile. This is the end of the Tower of Babel narrative here, where it says that the Lord scattered them from across the face of the earth. And so they stopped building the city. This is exactly what they didn't want. They didn't want to be scattered, but they were scattered. And then the Bible says, in fact, I'll just pull this up. I think that'd be easier. It says, this is why it is called Babel, because the Lord confused the language of the entire world, and from there the Lord scattered them from across the face of the earth. Now, of course, this is a joke. As you see here in this note, is a parody of the Pride of Babylon, right? As we said, Babylon really means gate of God or gate of the gods. But in Hebrew, it sounds like the word for confusion. So I've heard plenty of Adventists say, well, Babylon means confusion. Well, it doesn't mean confusion, but it's, as you can see here, it's this play on words that it sounds like the Hebrew word for confusion, okay, which is Bavel and Balal, So ultimately, that's what happens, though, isn't it? It's confusion. And so this is how we get all of these different language groups on the face of the earth. So really, Genesis 10 is kind of a genealogy of nations. Genesis 11, the first half of it, is really a genealogy of language and of sorts. Why do we have all these different languages? And this is how God introduced disunity into the world. Whew. All right. We, I think the last thing I'll say about this, and then Jim, you can close it up if you are so inclined, is we have to come face to face that in Genesis 1 to 11, this is the first unit in Genesis. It's Genesis 1 to 11 and then 12 to 50. These are the kind of the two divisions. 1 to 11 is just a unique narrative or collection of narratives where, you're not following, you start by kind of following one person, Adam, then Eve, this small group of people, and then expands into how God deals with all these nations on a city level or a national level. And then it seems like the rest of Genesis just kind of, or the rest of the Bible just kind of follows the same form, doesn't it? We start over again with one person in Genesis chapter 12, which is Abram. By the time we get to Revelation, we're dealing with whole nations, even before then, really. But you're dealing with whole nations and large groups of people and cycles of violence. And then what do we find in Revelation? It ends. The Bible ends with Babylon again. Just like Genesis 1 to 11. 11 ends in Babylon of this first unit. The rest of the Bible, it will go on and start with a small group of people and end with Babylon again. So we kind of see a microcosm here. What we don't have in Genesis 1 to 11, we have promises of redemption. We don't have a Savior yet. We have God coming down. And that's a key movement, as Jim pointed out. But he's not coming down to die on a cross at this point. That's going to come later. But it's that same movement of God coming down in the midst of our confusion and our pride and all of these things that's going to fix things for us, where Jesus is going to start to rebuild what has been broken down. So, I think when you deal with 1 through 11, you've got to acknowledge that God has a hand in allowing death, destruction, and division in the world, and that God's purposes in allowing death, destruction, and division are ultimately redemptive. That is his goal. And we also see our own human efforts, whether it's covering yourself with a fig leaf or whether it's building a tower, our efforts always backfire, and they are never sufficient. God has to come and give Adam proper clothes. His efforts to cover himself are not good enough, and God has to come down and stop this tower building. It wasn't good enough. Now, Jim, I suppose maybe, God wants us to reach heaven and to stay together, and he wants to have us, they want to make a name for themselves, but Revelation promises that he's going to give us a new name, isn't he?
All right, let's get a running start here. Let's you've brought out here that the word Babel refers to, or in terms of meaning, the door of God, the gate of God. The problem was that was not the door that he created for them. That was a door of their own desires, their own creation. It was founded in their own rebellion. It was founded based on them wanting to be something more than what he had intended for their own good. So let's talk about the right door. The right door, we had the right door in the ark. Anyone who wanted to be saved could enter that door. We have the door of the sanctuary, the gate, the entrance of the sanctuary. All are welcome, Jew, Gentile, to come through that gate of the sanctuary and find forgiveness of sins through Christ there. We have the door in the Song of Solomon, where the groom who represents Christ is knocking on the door, hoping that his lover will wake and come to the door and greet him in. And then we have the same picture from Song of Solomon in Revelation chapter 3, which happens to be wonderfully in the seventh and last church. It drives me nuts how we talk so terrible about the Laodicean church all the time when it has the greatest promises. But anyway, here we have Jesus standing at the door, and he's knocking. He's asking us to open the door so he can come in. And I will close with this. My grandfather was an artist, and I remember watching as a child one of his chalk drawings, which would go from a drawing on the canvas to switching to a different scenery when he turned on the light, what they call black light, and it would change the scenery on there. And I remember as a kid when he pointed out to me, or maybe I said it to him, there was no handle on the door. Jesus couldn't get the handle to come in. Yeah. And he pointed out to me, he says, no, the handle is on the inside. He is waiting for us to invite him in. He will not come into our lives unless that is what we want. So the whole door concept is one from Genesis to Revelation, where Jesus is himself the very door, and we have two choices. We can accept the door he provides, or like Babel, we can keep on trying to create a door that actually doesn't exist and will destroy us in the end.
Yeah, that's right. we hope you guys have a great class talking about the Tower of Babel. And there's a lot of juicy stuff here to get at. Again, don't run past all those genealogies and get to Babel. You know, spend a little bit of time there helping people, but also don't get bogged down on them, because I think the meat of this particular lesson is found in Genesis 11, 1-9 about Babel. So, hope you guys have a great class, and we'll see you guys next week.